Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Group 7 and we are going to discuss about fire and arson. Arson. Arson is purposely setting fire to property, either personal or belonging to someone else. Arson accounts for billions of dollars in loss or damaged property annually, but only about 17% of arson-related cases result in arrest. A fire is only considered an arson after all accidental causes have been ruled out, which means investigators have to prove an individual caused a fire deliberately and with harmful intent. This is why arson is both difficult to prove and prosecute in court. Arson investigation. Arson investigations are conducted to determine the cause of a fire and ensure the responsible party is held accountable. Arson investigators are usually retired firefighters or trained professionals with in-depth knowledge about types of fuel, how each fuel ignites and accelerates, and the impact each fuel has on the development of a fire. How does a fire investigation work? Evidence of arson is nearly impossible to preserve. Not only will the fire likely destroy physical proof, but the water and chemical foam is used to put out the blaze can also destroy potential evidence. Because of this, an arson investigator's most important witnesses are the firefighters that first arrive on the scene. The investigators will ask firefighters for details such as the color of the smoke, damaged sprinkler systems, condition of doors and windows, and the general strange behavior of the flames. After establishing the behavior of the fire, investigators will look for point of origin and any other physical evidence that can be documented. This allows them to reconstruct the event and use scientific method to prove and disapprove arson.
Why do people commit arson? When examining arson, one of the biggest factors is motive. And investigators will look for one of these factors when considering whether someone committed arson. First, vandalism, thrill seeking, concealment of crime, profiting from insurance money of property, revenge, attention seeking, or satisfying a hero complex, politics, mental illness. Do I need an arson investigator? You might want a fire investigator if someone in your family has been accused of arson. A qualified arson investigator can arm you with the evidence with stand up in a court. Your home or property has been affected by fire. Losing property to a fire is both emotionally trying and expensive, especially if you are suspicious of foul play. Unexperienced arson investigators can determine whether a fire was accidental or malicious, potentially saving your money and providing answers, even if you are not suspicious of arson. An arson investigators can observe the fire and ensure you get the insurance money you're entitled to. You are insurer. Your insurance companies lose billions of dollars annually to arson. Sometimes property owners will purposely set fires in order to collect insurance money. A fire investigator can determine cause of a blaze, haste insurance change in order to determine whether a policyholder deserves compensation.
The preliminary step in investigating fire and arson. The first step is arriving at the scene. Observe the fire and scene condition. First responder at the fire scene must observe condition and activities and provide investigators with an accurate and complete description. Exercise scene safety. Safety overrides all other concern. First responder must make sure that victims, bystanders, and public safety personnel are safe. This involves mitigating safety hazard that may further threaten victims, bystanders, and public safety personnel. They must exercise due caution to avoid injuries to themselves and others. Preserve the fire scene. First, responder must understand how rescue, medical, fire suppression, overhaul, and salvage effort can adversely affect evidence and take steps to preserve it. They should secure the fire scene and identify potential evidence, take preliminary steps to preserve it, and notify appropriate authorities about its existence. Establish security and control. First, responders should immediately establish control of the scene and initiate documentation of the scene. The second step is evaluating the scene. Once a lead investigator arrives at the scene to relieve the first responders, he or she should evaluate the scene, identify witnesses, and survey must be done. Contact first responders and establish presence. The investigator should meet with the incident commander and first responders to assess previous events and the current status of the fire scene. Make introduction, identify essential personnel, and determine scene safety and integrity issue. Define the scene boundaries. The investigator should perform a preliminary scene assessment, determine the area in which the site examination will be conducted, and establish the scene perimeter. Assess scene security at the time of the fire. The investigator should determine whether the building or vehicle was intact and secure, and if intrusion alarms or the fire detection and suppression system were operational at the time of the fire. Identify the resources required to process the scene. The investigator should determine what personnel may be required to process the scene according to the National Fire Protection Association 921 and other recognized national guidelines. The third step is documenting the scene. Photograph or videotape the scene. The investigator should create and preserve an accurate visual record to the scene and the evidence prior to disturbing the scene. Describe and document the scene. The investigator should create a permanent, documented record of observations to repress recollections, support the investigator's opinions and conclusion, and support photographic documentation. The fourth step is evidence at the scene. Identify, collect, and preserve evidence. The investigator should ensure that the evidence collectors identify, document, collect, and preserve evidence for the laboratory analysis, further investigation, and court proceedings. Prevent evidence contamination. The investigator should control access to the fire scene after fire suppression and see that the evidence is collected, stored, and transported so that it will not be contaminated. Package and transport evidence. The investigator should ensure that packaging, transportation, and storage procedure are allowed to prevent any destructive changes in the condition of the samples. Establish and maintain the chain of custody. The investigator should ensure that the chain of custody is maintained. The fifth step is completing the investigation. Release the scene. The investigator should release the scene after reasonable efforts have been made to identify, collect, and remove all the evidence from the scene for examination and that all physical characteristics of the scene have been documented. In addition, prior to the releasing the scene, associated legal, health and safety issues must be articulated to the party taking over the investigation and reported to public safety agencies if necessary. Submit reports to the appropriate databases. The responsible agencies must file incident reports with the appropriate databases. Detailed fire information is collected, integrated, and disseminated through national and state databases. These data help authorities identify fire trends and develop innovative procedure and equipment. And that's all. Thank you.